Hey Dad, I want to do a hopefully brief video about mixed actions, uh, what they are, why they're important, and how to think about them. Um, Up to this point, with the pre-flop charts, you've you've only dealt with pure actions, which is to say, with any given hand on the chart, uh, the same action is always correct when the chart applies. So you would either always raise or always fold. I'll just show you an example of that. Let's bring up, let's say, here's your under the gun. Let's bring up your under the gun raising range, and you'll see what I mean. Okay. Okay, so here's your under the gun raising range. And you notice every box is fully shaded with either white or black, which are the same. Those mean fold, or brown, which means raise. So if you have ace-10 suited under the gun, your chart says 100% of the time you should raise. And the reason that this chart recommends raising is because the person who made the chart has determined that with ace-10 suited, the expected value of raising is higher than the expected value of the other options. So it's higher than calling and it's higher than folding, and so it always raises because you want to choose the highest expected value action. Okay? With ace-9 suited, a little bit worse hand, the chart recommends folding, which means that it thinks folding is the highest EV action. We know that folding, the EV of folding is 0. It's always, if you, 0 is another, EV 0 is another way of saying break even. So what we're saying with this chart is ace-9 suited cannot do better than breaking even by taking an action other than fold. So calling must be minus EV from under the gun, and raising must be minus EV because we choose to fold, which is 0 EV. And so we're trying to choose the highest EV play. Okay? So it's pretty black and white, or white and brown in this case. Some actions make money and other actions don't make money, and so breaking even with them is the best choice. Here's a chart I just made for you that says you're in the low jack, MP2, versus an under the gun player who has raised. Okay? So when someone raises under the gun, let's just say an average player raises under the gun, an unknown player, we assume they have a very tight range. This is our range for raising under the gun. 7s plus, ace-10 suited plus, ace-queen off. Very, very strong hands. A few suited broadways. So we're assuming that we're facing a range something like that, and this is our response. It was to play even tighter, of course, and we have the hands that the super strong hands that we re-raise with, which are queens, kings, and aces, and ace-king offsuit and suited. And then we have the hands that we call with, which are slightly weaker hands that are also quite good. Pocket jacks, pocket tens, pocket nines, ace-queen suited, and ace-jack suited. Those are all in yellow, so they're pure calls. Every time you get the hand, you call. And that means that we think if you're facing a raise from under the gun and you have pocket tens, the EV of calling is higher than the EV of re-raising or the EV of folding. So we choose that option all the time. Okay? So those are pure actions, but sometimes the EVs of different options are either identical or extremely close. And so they're just, by definition, they're borderline hands. And so an example of that would be King Queen suited in this situation. With King Queen suited, your hand is clearly not strong enough to re-raise and be ahead there of the under the gun raising range, which again looks like this. King Queen suited is only ahead of 1, 2 hands in the entire range, and some under the gun raisers won't have those hands. It's breaking even against other hands that has 2 overcards against, but it's dominated by a bunch of hands. So re-raising is basically out with this hand. Folding is a reasonable option, and we know that the EV of folding is 0. But this chart says half the time fold and half the time call. Well, that means that the chart maker considers those 2 options to be equal in EV. And since we know one of the options is 0 EV, folding, that means that calling is also 0 EV. Because if calling was higher than 0 EV, then the box wouldn't be partially shaded. It would be fully shaded to call, which would be a better option than fold. So by definition, when a box has mixed actions, when a hand has mixed actions in our strategy, and folding is one of the options in the mix, we're choosing between folding and raising or folding and calling. What it means is the other option must also be break even. Okay? So folding is always 0 EV. It means it's a break even spot. So if fold is one of the options that could be chosen, then all of the options are approximately break even. Okay? So if they're approximately break even, why do them? Right? Why ever do something that doesn't make you money? You might as well just fold and make your life simple. Okay? And that's a reasonable argument. And the truth is, if your opponent never adjusts and doesn't know your strategy, which is true of a lot of live opponents that you'll face, then you could just always do either option. You could always fold all these hands that are mixes. 8s, 7s, 6s, ace-10 suited, king-queen suited. Or you could call every time with them because both plays break even. Okay? The reason to mix is because if you described your strategy, if your opponent could know your exact strategy and you told them and if they knew exactly what you were doing and you took these mixed actions pure one way or the other, so you told someone when you raise under the gun, here's what I'm going to do with all my hands, and all these borderline hands, I'm going to fold them. Or all these borderline hands, I'm going to call them every time. If you did that, your opponent could design a strategy that does better against you than he was currently doing when you were mixing. So another way of saying this is mixing plays makes our range harder to read. It makes it a little more difficult to put us on a hand, and that's a good thing for us. But again, the options themselves in a vacuum have the same EV. So anytime you have king queen suited and you don't feel like calling, you can just fold it. It's in this situation. Okay. So how do you choose what to do? Well, the most obvious way to choose a mixed action is to use your cards to randomize it. So you could just have a very simple strategy of with any of these hands in the mixed list, I just choose to I'll just look at the card. When I look at my cards, the card on the right will determine what I do with my mixed action hands. If the card on the right is red, then I'll call. And if it's black, I'll fold. Okay? So if you have 8 of clubs, 8 of diamonds, and you look down, oh, the 8 of diamonds is on the right, that's a red card, I'm going to call this time. But if it was 8 of diamonds, 8 of clubs, and the black card is on the right, when you look at your cards, I fold. So that would ensure that you are doing this mix exactly 50% of the time. But it isn't actually important that you do it exactly 50% of the time. Because, and sometimes the recommended mix won't be 50-50. It'll be 75-25 or 90-10. And this is a little hard to understand, but even if a chart or a solver recommends mixing an action 90% call, 10% fold, or 90% call, 10% raise, it doesn't mean that just because you're supposed to do one more often than the other, that the EV of that option is higher. If there is a mix at all, any mix, it means the EVs are the same. And so the EV of king queen suited in this situation is the same whether you mix it 50-50 or 90-10, either way, or do the same, or 100-0. Okay? The only danger is your opponent understanding how it affects the composition of your whole range, which usually isn't a concern. Okay? The other thing about this is the mixed action is the truth for like the neutral game state. So if your opponent is playing the range we expect, under the gun razor to use, blah, 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 then we should 50-50 mix pocket sevens between call and fold. But if the opponent is super loose, then that steers us one way. Or if the opponent is super tight, that steers us one way. So additional information can also be used to decide these borderline hands. Okay? And so, for example, if your opponent is really tight and he raises under the gun, he's exceptionally tight, then you would just take ace-10 suited and fold it. Because folding is 0 EV and calling is 0 EV under normal circumstances. So if the opponent's range is stronger, then the EV of calling must drop. Okay? So we would just fold. But we wouldn't necessarily change any of the pure actions. We wouldn't say he's tight, so now we're going to fold ace-queen suited. Ace-queen suited we've got marked as a call, and so we call with it. But with the mixed actions, it's fine to decide that some factor in game flow leads us to favor one of the mixed options. Okay, so that is the summary. We'll just go back through it. If an action that is recommended to be mixed, that means that all the options in the mix have the same EV. And if one of those options is folding, then the EV of folding is 0, so all the EV of all the options must be 0 or break even. The point of mixing is to make your range harder to read by your opponents. So if that's not an issue, then it's not important to mix. And the way that you choose what action you want to do in the mix is either randomize or use some information that you have in the game to push you one way or the other. Okay, hopefully that helps.